happening in fashion right now, and no one is talking about it loudly enough. Because while the industry keeps obsessing over billion-dollar conglomerates, celebrity ambassadors, and brand elevation, one designer just did something almost radical in modern luxury fashion. He took his name back. Giambattista Valli has officially regained full ownership of his maison from Artémis, the private investment arm of billionaire Pinot family, the same empire connected to Kering. And brats, this is bigger than people think. Because this is not just another business transaction. This is about survival, identity, creative freedom, and the brutal reality of what happens when fashion becomes too corporate to breathe. Inside fashion, not minimalism, not quiet luxury, not algorithm dressing. Fantasy, volume, drama, romanticism. Women floating down runways like living bouquets. He became one of the last true couture romantics in Paris. And for years, that fantasy worked. But fashion is expensive. Haute couture is even more expensive. And independent fashion houses rarely survive alone forever. So in 2017, Artémis invested in the brand. Then in 2021, they took majority control. Eventually, the Pinot family owned over 90% of the company. And on paper, that sounds glamorous, a billion-dollar backed fashion house. Global expansion, infrastructure growth, international visibility, but here's the part people don't like admitting. Luxury investment groups do not buy brands out of love, they buy potential. And the second that potential stops performing at the level they expected by corporate machinery, things shift quietly. And over the past year, the signs were everywhere. The couture show cancellations, the silence, the long-term sustainability reflections, the restructuring language. Fashion people know that wording. That wording means pressure. That wording means the fantasy is struggling to survive the financial reality underneath it. And according to reports, the brand has accumulated over $44 million in debt while generating less than $20 million in turnover. That's catastrophic for an independent couture house. So when people heard Valli bought back his company, everyone assumed it was some triumph billionaire comeback story. But the truth is so much stranger. Reportedly, he acquired the house for one symbolic euro. €1. What? Now, obviously, the real story is more complicated than that, because what actually mattered is the debt restructuring. Without the debt being erased, the company would have collapsed instantly under financial pressure. So in a way, this kind of wasn't just a buyback, it was a reset. It completes financial exorcism. And honestly, there's something almost cinematic about that. A designer losing control of his own fantasy world only to regain it after the empire surrounding him decides it no longer fits the machine. That's fashion. And this moment says something much larger about the luxury industry right now. Because Valli is not the only brand going through this. We're watching the entire era of fashion ownership reshuffle itself in real time. LVMH recently agreed to sell Marc Jacobs, Stella McCartney stepped away from the system too. Kering has been restructuring aggressively, Puma stakes sold, beauty decisions shifting, brand downsizing happening. Because the truth is, the fantasy of endless luxury growth is cracking, and independent creativity is becoming harder and harder to sustain inside corporate expectation. That's why Valli taking his house back matters emotionally, because whether people realize it or not, Valli represents a type of fashion that is disappearing. Fashion that still believes in escapism and beauty without irony and excess without apology, and yes, sometimes that kind of fashion becomes financially fragile, but it's also the kind of fashion people remember forever. Now, do I think this means everything suddenly becomes perfect for the house? No. Actually, independence may make things harder. Smaller budgets, less infrastructure, less corporate safety, but it also means something priceless. No transitional layer between the designer and the vision. That changes everything. Because fashion becomes dangerous again when the person creating it fully owns the world they're building. And honestly, I think that's why this story feels so interesting right now. Not because Valli won, but because an industry obsessed with acquisitions, mergers, corporate scaling, a designer quietly choosing authorship over empire suddenly feels rebellious. And maybe that's the future of fashion right now. not gigantic luxury domination, smaller, sharper, more personal worlds. Worlds built by designers who still believe fantasy matters. And if Valli returns to couture on a smaller, more sustainable scale, like reports suggest, that may actually save the soul of the brand, because couture was never supposed to behave like fast-moving corporate growth. Couture is supposed to feel impossible, and impossible things rarely scale cleanly. That's the entire point. Sincerely written in style, Mrs. October, aka the Princess of Fashion, Haley Henderson. And someone was like, what does BRAT stand for? And BRAT stand for Beautiful Rebels Ahead of the Standard. Period.